So I was told to stay on the carpet, so I will try to do that. So for the over the last 40 years, the internet has really been more free as in labor than free as in beer, right? So since 2005, with the emergence of the sharing economy, but really as part of a process that reached over the last 40 years, we've seen a shift away from direct employment, right, towards contract work. We've seen, with the likes of Uber and TaskRabbit, in some cases, unsustainably low wages, and centralized data ownership, and compromised data and privacy, no kidding, right? So we're all following the news. And really aiming for global monopolies and edge populations often being not considered in the design. And you can sum this whole thing up as a broken social contract, right? So much of this Chris alluded to since 1972, right? The productivity of American workers increased while their wages stagnated, but Chris did a fantastic job in outlining all of that. So like Mika said, in 2014, I really tried to, after working on digital labor for some 8 years, made this proposal to try to bring this almost 200-year-old idea of cooperatives to the digital economy and called it this very hard to pronounce thing, platform cooperativism. Tried to say that 3 times fast. So, so this would mean basically, in short, for you who are not familiar with that, is just imagine something like an Uber that is owned by the workers, or an Airbnb that is owned by the residents, TaskRabbit owned by the workers who are working on it. So it's based on democratic governance of platforms where the people who rely most on those platforms, this might be internet users, consumers, or the workers themselves, right, have a say in what happens on their platform. It's based on co-design, where from day one, you're not working with the sort of big ego design that we see in Silicon Valley so much, but really designing with the people who rely on this from day one. And it's based on open source development and the strengths of cooperatives, which is really hidden in plain sight, right? So you have 1 in 3 Americans being in cooperatives, 1 million jobs. Many people don't think of Ace Hardware or REI as co-ops, but right, these are sort of examples like right in your sight. So the idea is to bring the 7 cooperative principles. These are the principles at the heart of the co-op movement, right? So autonomy and independence, education and training, and concern for the community to the digital economy. So people, I've talked about this a lot in a lot of places, and so certainly people ask, well, how does this differ to the investor-based model? And so I listed here a few. So in the middle, maybe let's start with that, right? It's basically grabbing onto the heart, the algorithmic heart of these companies, ripping it out and putting in cooperative values, right? So which leads to fair pay, higher quality of jobs, so dignity on the job, leads to a lower turnaround of workers, productivity benefits that have been shown for all employee-owned businesses, right, if you're familiar with that research. And also the ability to scale cooperatives, which have a clear glass ceiling. In the US, there are maybe 300 worker co-ops, something in that range between 300 and 400. France has 300,000, right? So how perhaps this platform model is able to scale this cooperative model. So you get access to member capital, the revenue flows in the community, there are potential tax advantages, and after 2008, we learned that cooperatives and B Corps had a much higher resilience than other business forms, right? So these are some. So now this is not, as Mika kindly pointed out, not an academic pipe dream, but has a reality behind it with some 240 businesses worldwide. They are small, but they point to, I think, a real possibility for a fairer future of work. And so here you see some of the actors sort of on the map, and our hub is at platform.coop. So this leads me to a project which was really, it's really larger than life. And I was just told yesterday that this is sort of a size of a project that Google might take on, right? So insanely ambitious, for which Google.org gave us $1 million to develop a critical analysis of the digital economy, to offer an introduction to the cooperative model and platform co-ops in particular in several languages, to create resources that help to create a narrative that sort of pushes back against the business as usual that we are familiar with, and that creates, once people have this understanding and say, now I really want to do this, and I get those emails almost every day, from cab drivers, Uber drivers in South Africa, to programmers in India, to dog walkers in Los Angeles, who basically say, hey, how do we do this? What's next? And so this is sort of like a response to that, right? Like basically trying to help people to make this easier. In January, we started at Harvard Law School a legal clinic on platform cooperativism to make it easier legally to start these ventures. We are working on a governance tool, so that makes it easier for workers that are distributed sometimes geographically to participate in the day-to-day activity and governance of these cooperatives. And of course, we are thinking about finance and how to channel finance and startup funding to those businesses. We are creating an interactive map and experimenting with the cooperative data commons, so cooperative data ownership. The sectors in which this plays out are basically endless, from childcare to recycling to healthcare and education, and you can name a sector, and I could probably think about a way in which this platform co-op model could be applied. So for this project, we are starting to work with 3,000 childcare providers in Illinois who want to start a platform co-op. So we focus on 5 co-ops worldwide, as you will see, to basically start working and implementing this development kit. The second is a group of recyclers in Brazil. And then we are working with Seva in India, which is a federation of 103 cooperatives of poor self-employed women. And there we are thinking about a labor platform for young urban women in Ahmedabad and other cities who want to bring beauty services like makeup and hair to people's houses as part of the gig economy. And they don't want to be exploited. So we're trying to help them to create a platform co-op. And we are also trying to reach the indigenous women in the southern mountains of Gujarat, India, which are members of a cooperative but are indigenous women and have very little access to the co-op governance. So we are working with those as well. We're working with the co-op, the only worker co-op in the social care sector in Australia, and starting to work with refugee women in Germany from Syria who want to start a childcare cooperative and enter the job market like that. So here we call this visualization a virtuous tornado, right? So we are starting at the bottom. You see the principle. So it's all grounded in inclusive design, open source, democratic governance, and broad-based platform ownership. And then building with on small successes. We are basically going from starting with these co-ops and then seeking, of course, more funding, right, to bring this to other communities worldwide. So this is a very large project for which the Platform Cooperativism Consortium collaborates with the Inclusive Design Research Center in Canada, in Toronto, which has a team of some 30 developers and full-time and 70 on standby. So I think they are up to the task. I just want to very quickly give you a few examples so that you see that this is not all speculative, but just give you a sort of taste for the structure of these, what is out there, what's already operating. So let's see. So right here in Sunset Park, you can all sign up right now on your phones for Up and Go. And they will also be at 2:30 at our workshop, so you can meet them. So these are low-income immigrant women who set up 3 cooperatives that are all working under this Up and Go platform, offering home cleaning services, right, as a cooperative service. In Switzerland, the head of the ETH founded the My Data Co-op, platform co-op, which basically experiments with patient data ownership. So they're trying to create a cooperative cloud of patient data so that patients are back in control of their own data and can selectively release them to doctors or hospitals. Stocksy in Canada is a stock photography site of about 1,000 photographers that made some $11 million last year and is interesting in endless ways, which we can discuss maybe later. And this should advance, and it does. At Stanford, there is not a platform co-op, but at least an attempt to create a more equitable form of crowd work that is established there with Demo. And in Berlin, you have the cooperative equivalent to Spotify, which basically brings blockchain technology together with the cooperative business model to offer a music streaming service that pays the musicians twice as much as Spotify. And there's also a cooperative marketplace, a taxi company in Denver, and you're probably familiar with the Banyan Project, which basically brings cooperative news platforms into news deserts. And if this was all very fast, and it has to be because we have to sort of run here, so we wrote this all up for you, and so you can look at our books. I think Überworked and Underpaid is upstairs in the bookstore, and Ours to Hack and to Own is it's like the mixtape of this movement, if you like. So we have, for the last years, had many events at the New School, and this is also where I founded the Platform Co-op Consortium, which is made up of some 40 institutions, all trying to support this: academia, co-ops, businesses. And now we are also thinking about starting an institute for the digital cooperative economy. Here you see some of the actors. And you can all join us September 28, 29, and come with us to Hong Kong, where we bring this idea to Asia. So we bring Asian cooperatives together to introduce this idea there. And now I have 2 minutes. And I'm probably done early. So, but I wanted to make sure that I end somewhat in an articulate way by reading this out, this one paragraph, which is basically that you don't change platform capitalism solely by criticizing it, by giving talks at events like this, or by solely hoping that policymakers will pick up your ideas. Instead, you change it by committing an economic model that reveals the failure of the existing model and perhaps puts it out of business. I'm really not sure what the odds are that this model will make the old one obsolete, but I'm sure that 30 years from now, platform co-ops will still be a slice of the digital economy. But how significant it will be really depends on all of us, on you here. And I'm not sure what the odds are that we will win, but I know what the odds are if we don't try. Okay, thank you.
Wow. So, thank you, Trebor. Have a seat. We have a couple minutes for questions. Again, put them in on Slido. I wanted to ask you something, but I'm going to just read the first one very quickly. Is this just a 2.0 version of the labor movement? Or how does this relate to the labor movement, I guess is the question, and where unions and the labor movement maybe is going today?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that unions like Sabre, the one I mentioned in India, is actually a union and a co-op. So they found that there were things that worked really well if you're a union, and then the economic part is supplied by the co-op. And there were a moment in the 1880s, right, where, not to get all academic on you, but for about 10 years, right, the Knights of Labor, so they were all about setting up co-ops, right? Haymarket riots, right? Labor history. But I think there is a real opportunity, right, with platforms because they organize workers, they aggregate workers, right? And that means is of course also political power. So if you have 3,000 babysitters or you have 10,000 Indian women on a platform, that also means you can ask them questions and take their answers to local policymakers to advocate for them, right? So there is a very political element, not just an economic one, but also a political one, to platforms.
So I want to ask you a question about the challenge of actually making one of these work, because the examples you gave are all inspiring, but I think any of us who have ever been part of a co-op, a food co-op or maybe whatever your housing situation is, they usually involve a lot of meetings and a lot of deliberation and take time. So how do you deal with that? I mean, you're fighting against a different model, which is all about convenience. I can get a taxi here in 2 minutes by just pressing a button, and I didn't have to do any other work. Right. So would you address that?
Right. Well, so Oscar Wilde, right? The problem with socialism is that it cuts into your evenings. I think that's part of it. I think the more to the point is, I think so we are focusing on pull markets, if you may have noticed, right? So we're not really talking so much about taxi for transportation business. We're not talking, we're really talking about businesses where, sectors where there's way more demand than supply, like home healthcare. Right, so which has a huge increase in workers. I think in the United States it's 630,000 workers needed over the next 20 years or so that are not currently in that sector. And so if you make that sector more attractive through a model like that, I think you have a very good chance, a better chance than competing perhaps with Uber.
Can you give us some ideas of how like a cooperative Uber or TaskRabbit could actually work in practice?
Well, they exist already. So in Denver, you have Green Taxi, which has a third of the Denver market, and is 2 years old. So not that they are not struggling too. I mean, they are, right, to be clear. But they are a reality. There are, labor markets that exist, the marketplaces like Fairmondo in Germany. I mean, it's not that this is, I don't want to pick like paint a rosy picture of like some huge success story. There are lots of struggles and also failure, right? But I mean, in Silicon Valley, everybody expects a lot of failure. It's part of the culture, right? But suddenly with a cooperative, everybody expects them to go from success to success, right? Which is a bit disingenuous, perhaps.
One last quick question, which is how platform cooperatives could collaborate with movements that are themselves trying to revalue unpaid labor, underpaid labor. I suppose I should throw Chris Hughes's previous talk into the mix as well. Do you see some synergies there?
Yeah, I think it's the only way to succeed, right? To work, to collaborate with the Working Families Party, or to collaborate with the Democratic Party or social movements. I think it's the only way for this to go forward, for sure. Yeah.
Okay,
definitely.
So we're going to get into all of that this afternoon during your workshop, Trebor. And as I said before, under the Geneva Convention governing the rights of authors, buy his books.